So in order to use the majority of the equations that are given in this course, you're first going to need to convert all the quantities into standard international or SI units. All right, so first we're going to go over what these standard international units are. So in question 1, I'm asking you to state the corresponding standard international unit for each of the following measurements. So first, distance. Okay, so distance is how far you've traveled. Now let's think about what are some possible units for distance. We could have kilometers, we could have centimeters, but the standard international unit for distance is just the meter, meters. Okay, so I'm just going to put in M for meters. Okay, what about for time? So time is how long it takes you to do something. So it could be something like hours or minutes, but the standard international unit for time is seconds. Okay, speed is how fast you're moving. If you're driving a car, you might think of that as your speed in kilometers per hour, but the standard international unit for speed is meters per second. Okay, acceleration. Acceleration is how fast your speed is changing over time. Some people might say it's changing at 1 kilometer an hour per second, for example, but the standard international unit for acceleration is meters per second squared, which is the same as meters over second squared. Okay, so it's the same thing. Next, we have force. So a force is a push or a pull acting on an object, and the standard international unit for force is the Newton. Okay, we're going to get more into this later, but for now I just want you to know what the standard international units are for each of these quantities. Next is mass. Okay, so the standard international unit for mass is kilogram. Okay, so in some courses like chemistry, they use grams, but the standard international unit and the unit we're going to use in this course is kilograms. So if a mass is given to you in grams, for example, or milligrams, you would have to convert it into kilograms. And then finally, we have energy. The standard international unit for energy is the joule. All right, so now we're going to talk about equivalent units. So fill in the blanks. 2a is 1 kilometer is equal to how many meters? So how many meters are in 1 kilometer? So that would be 1,000. So these are things that you should just know. If you're not comfortable with them, just make sure you're practicing and you understand how to convert from one to another. You'll need to know your equivalent units here. Okay, so some people mix them up and they would say 1,000 kilometers is 1 meter. And intuitively that doesn't make a lot of sense, but it's very easy to make that mistake, so just be really careful. Now we have 1 hour is how many minutes? So how many minutes in an hour? 60. 60 minutes in 1 hour. Next is 1 minute equals how many seconds? How many seconds are in a minute? 60. 60 seconds in 1 minute. All right, next we have 1 hour is equal to how many seconds? All right, so we have 60 seconds in a minute and then 60 minutes in an hour. So to figure out how many seconds there are in an hour, you would just multiply 60 times 60, which is 3,600. 3,600 seconds in 1 hour. 1 meter is how many centimeters? So centi means 100th of. So 100 centimeters are in 1 meter. Millimeter, so milli means 1,000th. So 1,000 millimeters are in 1 meter. All right, and now we have 1 kilogram is how many grams? Kilo means 1,000. So 1,000 grams is the same as 1 kilogram. All right, so take a moment to just make sure you know how to do all of these on your own. These would not be given to you on a formula sheet. You're expected to know these equivalent units. All right, now we're going to use that idea to convert between units. And now you might convert your units in different ways than I do. I'm going to show you a method that I like the most. If you prefer a different method, that's totally fine as long as you're getting the correct answer and it all makes sense. The way I like doing it makes it harder to make mistakes. So I like this method, especially when the question's a little bit complicated. So the first question is asking us to convert 2.5 kilometers into SI units. So first you need to know what the SI unit is for instead of kilometers. So this would be distance. So the SI unit for kilometer or for distance is meters. And we talked about that early on here. We had the SI units for distance, which is meters. Okay, so what I do is I multiply by a fraction. I want to get rid of kilometers. Right now, kilometers is in the numerator or on top, so I want to cancel it out and put it on the bottom. Instead of kilometers, I want meters because meters is the SI unit for distance. Now I need to make my fraction equivalent, so I need to make the top and the bottom values equal to each other. Well, in question 2, and this should say question 3 here. In question 2, we had said that 1,000 meters is the same as 1 kilometer. So you can see now that kilometers will cancel out, and you're left with just multiplying 2.5 times 1,000 divided by 1. And so when you do that, you get 2,500. And the units that you're left with is meters right here. So that's it. So that was a simple example. We'll do it again. 73.2 kilonewtons. So we want to get rid of kilonewtons and change it to the SI unit for force, which is newtons. So I'm going to get rid of kilonewtons. I'm going to put it in the denominator so it cancels out with the kilonewtons that's here in the numerator. And instead of kilonewtons, I want newtons. Now I have to write what's equivalent to what. 1 kilonewton is the same as 1,000 newtons. Just like 1 kilogram is the same as 1,000 grams, for example. Okay, so now we simply need to think about what's canceling here. Kilonewtons are canceling out. I'm left with 73.2 times 1,000 divided by 1. So that's 73,200 newtons. Okay. Next we have 13.8 hours. The SI unit for time is not hours, it's seconds. So I'm going to cancel out my hours by putting hours in the denominator and replace it with seconds. In Canada, seconds is just an S, not SEC. Now how many seconds are in 1 hour? We did this in the previous question. There's 60 seconds in a minute, and there's 60 minutes in an hour, so there's 60 times 60 seconds in an hour. So that would be 3,600 seconds in 1 hour. So I'm going to type this on my calculator. I have 13.8 times 3,600. I can divide by 1 if I want, but that doesn't change the answer. And I get 49,680. My hours cancel out, and I'm left with seconds. Okay, in order for something to cancel out, the same value, so hours, has to be in the numerator on the top and in the denominator on the bottom. They wouldn't cancel out if they were both on top, for example. All right, let's move on to D. So here we have 24.5 millimeters per second. So this per second over here is the same as writing 24.5 millimeters per second. And I like doing it this way because it emphasizes the fact that seconds is actually in the denominator. So now we're going to go through the same process to change this to SI units. So we're going to do 1 unit at a time. We have millimeters. We want to convert millimeters into the corresponding SI unit. So the SI unit for distance is just meters. We want to get rid of millimeters, so we'll put it in the denominator. And instead, meters goes in the numerator. You'll see that millimeters will cancel out. Now we have to write what's equivalent. 1 meter is equivalent to 1,000 millimeters. Okay, so we've dealt with millimeters, now seconds. Well, seconds is already the correct SI unit, so we don't need to convert it at all. So now all we need to do is think about what cancels out millimeters, because they're on top and bottom. Now we have 24.5 times 1 divided by 1,000. So 24.5 times 1 stays the same, divided by 1,000, and we get 0.0245. My units are now meters on top, and on the bottom is seconds. So I can either write it per second like this, or I could write per second like this. It doesn't really matter which one I choose. So I'm going to write it like this, meters per second. All right. Next I have 4,820 centimeters squared. So I need to convert that into the corresponding SI unit. Okay, so the SI unit for distance was not centimeters, it was meters. So this is an area because it's centimeters squared. The corresponding SI unit for that would be meters squared. Now we're going to ignore the fact that there's a squared for now, and we're just going to cancel out the centimeters. So centimeters is in the numerator right now. I'm going to put it in the denominator. And instead of centimeters, I'm going to replace it with the correct SI unit, which is meters. Now I'm going to write out the equivalency. So 1 meter is the same as 100 centimeters. But notice that centimeters and centimeters squared will not cancel out because one's squared and the other one isn't. So what we do to correct this is we square the entire bracket. So we put the squared on the outside, which means I now have 1 meter squared and 100 squared centimeters squared. Okay, so now the centimeter squared cancels out with this, which would be centimeters squared, and I'm left with meters squared as a unit on the top. So when I type this on my calculator this time, I need to type it out as 4,820 times 1 squared, which 1 squared is still 1, so that doesn't change anything, divided by 100 squared. So that squared on the bottom is really important. A lot of people forget to type it in. So I have to remember that, and I get 0.482, and my units are now meters squared. All right, moving on to F. Okay, just like in D, I'm going to change these units around so it's more obvious of what's in the numerator and what's in the denominator. So I'm going to rewrite this as 2.54 kilometers over hour, because that's what per hour means. It just means over hour. Hours in the denominator. Now I'm going to change to SI units. So kilometers needs to get canceled out, so I'm putting it in the denominator. Instead of kilometers, I'm going to change it into meters because that's the correct SI unit for distance. Now 1,000 meters is the same as 1 kilometer. So be very careful because sometimes people will mix it up and say 1 meter is 1,000 kilometers. That doesn't really make any sense because a meter is very small and a kilometer is very large. So 1,000 meters are equivalent to 1 kilometer. Just take a second to make sure that's correct. Now we know kilometers are canceling out. So we've changed our kilometers to meters. Now we need to do the same thing with hours because hours is not the correct SI unit. So I'm going to get rid of hours by putting it in the numerator. It was in the denominator before. Now I'm going to put it in the numerator to cancel it out. Instead of hours, I want seconds. Now I write the equivalency. 1 hour is the same as 3,600 seconds. Now I can type all of this up on my calculator. So I'm really just multiplying everything that's on the top and dividing by everything that's on the bottom. I can ignore the ones though because they don't make a difference. So I'm going to type 2.54 times 1,000 divided by 3,600, and I get 0.70555, and now these 5s go on forever, so I'm just going to round it to be 0.70. This 5 here is followed by a number that's 5 or greater, so I'm going to round it up to a 6. Now let's take a look at our units. Our kilometers canceled out and our hours also cancel out. So I'm left with meters in the numerator and seconds in the denominator. So I'm going to write meters per second, which means that seconds is in the denominator. All right, moving on to G. So G says 88.5 milligrams. So I want to get rid of milligrams because that's not the correct SI unit. And instead of milligrams, I want the correct SI unit for mass, which is actually kilograms. Now I might not know how many milligrams are in a kilogram, so instead I'm going to change this over to grams first. And then once I change it over to grams, I'm going to change it to kilograms. Okay, so if you want to do that, you can. If you already know how many milligrams are in a kilogram, you can do it in one step instead. Now let's write the equivalency. 1 gram is the same as 1,000 milligrams. We're not done there though, because the SI unit for mass is not gram, it's kilogram. I need to get rid of grams, so I'm going to put grams in the bottom. I'm going to cancel these grams out, and instead of grams, I want kilograms. Now I write the equivalency. 1 kilogram is the same as 1,000 grams. All right, so now all I need to do is divide 88.5. I don't need to multiply by ones because that doesn't do anything. Divided by 1,000 because it's in the denominator, and then divided by 1,000 again. And I'm left with, my calculator says 8.85 times 10 to the negative 5. Now what does that times 10 to the negative 5 mean? Just that the decimal place needs to get moved over to the left 5 times, which means once it moves over 5 times, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that decimal place is now here. And everything else now is a bunch of zeros that's in front of it. So there would have been a bunch of zeros right here. Okay, so I'm left with 0.0000885. And my units are now, my milligrams are canceled, my grams are canceled, I'm left with kilograms. Okay, if you wanted to leave it as just 8.85 times 10 to the negative 5 kilograms, that's also correct. All right, H, 2.17 kilometers per hour squared. All right, so this one's the hardest of all of them. If you feel like you've got this, try it out on your own and then connect with us, like pause the video and then replay it once you're ready to go, just to make sure it's correct. But let's go ahead and do this now. So I'm going to rewrite this as 2.17 kilometers per hour squared, emphasizing that hour squared is in the denominator. Now I want to get rid of kilometers. So to get rid of it, I need to put kilometers in the denominator to cancel it out. And instead of kilometers, I want meters. Now I write my equivalency. 1 kilometer is the same as 1,000 meters. All right, so I've taken care of kilometers. Now I need to take care of hours. Hours right now is in the denominator, so I'm going to put it in the numerator so that it can cancel out. Instead of hours, the correct SI unit for time would be seconds. So I'm going to change it to seconds. Now for my equivalency, 1 hour is the same as 3,600 seconds. But wait, hours squared and hours will not cancel out because one is squared and the other one isn't. So we need to make them, the second one here, we need to make it squared. We can't just square it inside, we have to square the entire bracket, which means the 3,600 is being squared as well. Let's take a look at our units to see how they all cancel out. Kilometers cancels with kilometers. Hours squared cancels with hours squared. Hours being squared out here. Okay, one's in the denominator, the other one's in the numerator. Now type this up with me to make sure that you're typing everything correctly on your calculator. 2.17 times 1,000 We can ignore the 1 because 1 squared is still 1, divided by 3,600 squared. And we get 1.674 times 10 to the negative 4. And the units now are meters, because that's the unit that's in the numerator, per, and in the denominator we have seconds squared. Okay, if I don't like to see times 10 to the negative 4, or maybe your calculator doesn't show that, you can just move the decimal place to the left 4 units, and you'll be left with 0.0001674 meters per second squared.